why did I get into water and sustainability? Because I thought it was the right thing to do. Citizens have to be involved at the bottom level. There is also a theory about this. It's a theory about the commons, where people go in and take responsibility. And they have to be given this responsibility, because then they begin to understand what are the problems also. And of course, that also influences their ways of educating, raising their children. It influences the ways of consuming. I do some meditation. We have sounds. We have the sounds of nature. And one of the most favorite sounds, that is the sound of water, because it actually makes us relax. We had a conference where the World Wildlife Foundation participated, and the first slide they put on, it showed us these numbers. 36% of all life in the water has disappeared in 40 years. 90% of commercial fish populations are subject to overfishing. 40 years is not a very long time. And why is it so? That is because capitalism is about profit making, In that sense, it doesn't really care about everything else.
Hi, I'm Dr. D.
Hi, I'm Princess Gaia.
And I'm Kenneth.
So we are so lucky today to host our friend and colleague, Kenneth. And some of our audience may not know you. Could you just tell us a little bit about your personal and professional background, and how did you get interested in water?
Well, my personal background is that I'm from Denmark. I was born and raised here in a small island called Vendsyssel, which is actually in the north of Denmark. And in Vendsyssel, there's a small university, or there was a university, or there is a university called Aalborg University. It used to be small, but now it's getting kind of big. It's quite a new. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I'm kind of homebound. So I don't think that I would have gone to the university if there hasn't been a university here in Aalborg. And it came in 1974, so it's about 46 years old. I'm 51. So you can imagine there's not a big academic tradition here in my part of Denmark. So it was kind of an accident that I started there. And so that's the background. And I really started my academic studies because of an accident. I didn't know what else to do. So I was young, and I needed to do something. So I started at the university. And then I got interested in philosophy and ethics and leadership and organization. I was a very reasonable guy at that time. So I decided to study economy. Oh, I shouldn't say that, but that was a little bit stupid because it was not really my interest. So, but I got interested in organization studies by reading the history of organization studies, and then I got into philosophy and ethics and things like that. And from a PhD, I did some studies on power in organizations. Became interested in critical studies. I kind of follow my intuition. I try to figure out and try to be directed by what I feel is the right thing to do. And that has always been the story of my academic career. I never followed any advice or reason or anything like that. I always followed my gut feeling. And at one point, my gut feeling told me that I should get into storytelling. I met David at a conference. There is something about indigenous communities, spirituality, storytelling, all these things. And also the story about water, sustainability, all the climate goals just came to me. It was like, this is the right thing to do. Things. But there was also kind of a backstory to it that I got engaged in a plastic project a couple of years ago. And so I would also say that this is also some of the background for my interest. And when you talk about plastic, we're talking about plastic, how to reuse plastic that came in from the ocean. So in that sense, I became very much interested in the problems concerning the ocean. My presentation is called Water's Agency. And there was something about the title that it kind of appealed to me. So there is this double meaning of it. What does it mean to us? But also what kind of agency does water have in itself? So that was actually the background for calling it Water's Agency. I kind of collected these points in 3 points. The first thing is about about water, what it means in a very, very physical sense. And of course, Princess Gaia have told us again and again that we are water. And she is actually very, very much right in that. Because when we look at ourselves and look at our bodies, up to 60% of the human adult body is water. And then you look at some very, very important parts of our body. You look at our brain and our hearts, about 73% water. Then you can look at our lungs, they're 83% water. So actually a lot of the critical parts of our body are very, very much water. So in a very, very physical sense, water is very, very important. And I came to think about this guy, which I met a couple of years ago in Bolzano in Italy. This is, of course, the Iceman, Ötzi, and I don't know if you've heard about him, because Ötzi was a kind of a body that was found on the border between Italy and Austria, I think about 20 years ago. And it was a very, very interesting experience to visit Ötzi, because his body could actually tell you a lot about his life. Yeah. So just from the remains of his body, if I've taken particular tests and things, they could see what he ate, what he lived from, what parts of the Alps that he's been moving through and things like that. So I think that's a very good example of one of the key points about also water and place in particular, that places kind of materializes in our bodies. And we are also part of places. So we cannot really separate ourselves from the places in which we were born, because they are kind of in us and they move with us, so to speak. And Bruno Latour made this point in a presentation that he said, okay, what will we actually find in 5,000 years when people look into our bodies? What will they find? Will they find pesticides? Will they find plastics? What kind of chemicals, sugar, and things like that? So in that sense, there's also kind of a warning, because all these substances that we put out into nature, they kind of become part of us. But there's a second point about water, because I think the first point is very, very physical. Body water comes into us, places comes into us, and they can look at us and they can see different places in us and things like that. But what does water actually mean to our stories and our practices? Because that is what I mean with the second point, that water is something existential for who we actually are. And here I have some pictures from my place. That was the place that I just told you about, Vendsyssel, where I come from. I am biased from the place where I come from, but also other people also say that it is actually one of the most beautiful places in Denmark. So you have to go to northern Jutland to see a real beach. This is something that we take pride in. So these places really mean something for us. There is a kind of tradition. You go out, you take out your socks, and you go out into the water, and then you are there where two oceans actually meet. So we have waves coming from two sides. So that's a kind of tradition. Why do we do that? That's because we like it, But it's also something to do with the place and things. So we take pride in places where we come from. They are also part of us in our stories. And of course, Bruce Springsteen was singing about this. He was singing about we went down to the river, and into the river we dive down to the river tonight, and things like that. So in that sense, water is something that is existential. It is kind of reflected in our songs, poems, books, writings. It makes us relax, and is also somehow something we desire, and something that we perhaps are losing. There's an existential meaning of water. It's not just something that is physical. I've been working with this kind of model for leadership. It's very, very simple model, but the basic point is that all true storytelling, we're talking a lot about the storytelling organization, but what is a true storytelling organization? And for me, a true storytelling organization will always have this kind of relationship between three different things. There is Gaia, nature's life cycles. There has to be kind of part of a true storytelling organization. There has to be a kind of a natural relationship between Gaia and the kind of material practices that are kind of parts of organizations and technologies in organizations. And it also has to be part of the way we communicate, the way we make strategies, the way we relate to other people. Then there's a third point about water, and that refers back to some of the things that I said in the beginning, where I talked about water's agency. And I think that's quite important also. This is got a picture of the critical zone that we have been talking so much about. And I kind of like that because it shows how water actually circulates. And it also shows something about that sometimes when we talk about water, we're thinking about lakes, we're thinking about rivers, we're thinking about oceans and things like that. But actually, water is all over the place. You think about water, comes down from the heaven, goes through the surface, the soil. That's like the arteries, the veins, the capillaries, and things like that. That is actually what gives life. And in the end, it actually goes into the rivers and the lakes and the streams, or it just evaporates from the surface or something like that. But the point is that it actually circulates. So it moves. And that circulation is kind of also creating the spaces and the places that we are living in. So it even flies, it becomes airborne, it comes down again as snow or rain or something like that. And in that sense, it kind of shapes the landscapes, the places that we are part of, the ecosystems and human geographies. And of course, water is also shaped by that. So it's not just about that we have to make sure that we get the right and clean water. It's also that the water is actually part of this larger ecosystem in a larger sense. And that means something because because of water circulation, actually things become a problem for us. And suddenly I saw this headline, it's raining plastic, for instance. So plastic has been found in the Arctic and in the Midway Islands. The reason why I mentioned the Midway Islands is far away from everything. There shouldn't be plastic at the Midway Islands because there's no people there. But anyway, they found plastic in the Midway Islands. They have found plastic in the Arctic. And the point is that water is kind of spreading our substances uncontrollably because it circulates. In my own country, water is suddenly becoming a problem. Why? Because it rains too much. That means that our sewage system they cannot follow. So that means that a lot of municipalities are actually pumping what you call black water directly out into the ocean or into the lakes or into the rivers because they have to, because otherwise we will have sewage water in the streets and in the houses and things like that. So they have to pump it out directly into the oceans. When they do it year after year, it becomes a very, very bad excuse, because then it's just stupid. Then they should do something about the problems. But here the point is also because of the water circulation is coming down suddenly, because our own material practices, they suddenly turn into become a very, very big problem for us. So water is kind of uncontrollable. What should we do about it? And this is more general in terms of sustainability, not only about water. I think water is very critical in terms of sustainability. I'll come back to that. And if we look at the UN system itself, it kind of has a very kind of traditional conservative approach to sustainability. So they try to kind of incorporate it into the existing capitalistic system. And I bought this book written by a guy called Peter McAteer, Sustainability is a New Advantage. So that's kind of a typical approach of capitalism to sustainability. So he would say something like, he also says so directly, I'm a firm believer in sustainable capitalism. So he would try to incorporate sustainability into the capitalist system and look at all the environmental problems, also water problems, as kind of business opportunities. A typical capitalistic answer. So capitalism is actually the root of our problems, So I don't believe that sustainable, there is no such thing as sustainable capitalism. That's my belief. So might as well say it out loud, there is no such thing as sustainable capitalism. Sustainable capitalism, they will talk about balancing, people, profit, and planet. They've been talking about that since the Club of Rome in 1960. And also the Brundtland report from 1987. They also talk about this balance. Okay, now we're talking about balancing people, profit, and planet for many years, and nothing is happening. Actually, it only gets worse and worse and worse. I think so history tells us that this doesn't work. Capitalism cannot solve the problem. I found this quote from Toni Morrison. She's quite direct in terms of the criticism of society, and also how she actually connects racism and fascism with capitalism. I think the point here is it's a rather rough quotation, but I kind of like it because what she's talking about here is that the essence of capitalism is to put value on everything. So you put value on people. You put economic value on people and begin to separate people according to economic value. You look at everything in terms of resources. You look at everything in terms of economic gain. That will eventually lead to what she calls fascism. I think that's the main point that she's actually making. So I think that really captures the essence of capitalism. Some of the disturbing developments is if societies are kind of developing into parallel societies. So we have rich parts of societies where we have people living in very, very rich spaces, and then we have all the rest. In that sense, you can kind of link biopolitics and capitalism very directly together. Capitalism has to be tamed. I think capitalism can be there in a kind of contained form, but what is really important is that we find ways of organizing society in which capitalism can take part, but where it's not the main part of society, if you understand what I mean. But just get back to the point of capitalism as being, associated with racism, fascism. It's actually associated with destruction, I think. And there are so many examples of this, because capitalism is always about destruction. It will continue until it self-destroys after having destroyed all of us. And I think they will keep on putting profit-making before balancing these three different people, planet, and profit. I think that's very, very evident. There is this example with the blue tuna fish, which is one of the most highly priced fish populations in the world. And I'm not sure about if I should tell this story about in this what has been recorded, but I've heard this story about a sushi company, and they invented a very, very elegant or very, very nice business model. So they will buy a lot of these blue tuna fish, and then they will freeze them. So it was not for consumption or not for immediate consumption. They will freeze the blue tuna fish because when the population of blue tuna fish would go down, then they would be sitting on a gold mine. Let's get back to capitalism. The language capitalism is wrong. I think we shouldn't be deceived by capitalism. Capitalism puts profit first always. I'm not saying this because there's anything wrong with private corporations. It's just the way it works. Economy will always win in the triple bottom line. As I mentioned, the blue tuna fish story, the plastic story. The funny thing about plastic is that they keep on saying that we cannot live without plastic. It's a pretty interesting thing to say, given that plastic has only been here for 50, 60 years. So of course we can live without plastic. What we cannot live without is fish in the water. I think that's the bigger problem, actually. And we cannot live with all that plastic pollution. That's what we cannot live with. Economy will always win in triple bottom line, and there's nothing like a good Anthropocene. Arndt and Benjamin, or Arndt referring to Benjamin actually, Benjamin has this image about the angel of history. So you can think about Hannah Arendt and Walter Benjamin as angels of history. Because what they look at capitalism, and what they see is a system of destruction. So it's like that they use this image of this angel of history. And the interesting thing about the angel of history is that the angel of history is trying to fly back, trying to kind of recover something that is getting lost. So our faces are faced towards our past. What we see are piles of wreckage, garbage, trash piling up. So all these what you call relations of production, relations of consumptions, are kind of propelling us towards the future. We actually want to go back, but we cannot go back because it's like our wings have got caught. And of course, what it's referring to, okay, we want to change a lot of things. We want to go back to something that is more like authentic, that is more real, but we cannot because we are part of all these material practices. We are always being pulled away somehow. To this, but at least there is a kind of a deeper truth, and we have to find our way back to that. And what is this truth? Well, Arndt or Benjamin are not very clear on this, but it has something to do with freedom. It has something to do with responsibility. It has something to do with care. It has something to do with compassion. There's a kind of this deeper truth. And I think there's something interesting in talking about things like in this way, because we always carry this deeper truth within us somehow. And this is what we have to build from. And actually, I think that is the language of ethics. Even though it's very, very hard to speak about, it is also some of the things that we have to get back to. Benjamin, he gives us this image of the pearl diver, pearl diving into our past. So it's like, okay, we have to go down to the bottom of the sea and try to find something there that has been kind of buried. Then we have to pick it up. So in that sense, the pearls that we are looking for is this language of ethics. This is freedom, this responsibility, this care, this compassion. This is the kind of a deeper truth that we are kind of looking for. Capitalism has to be built on that. The economic system has to be built on that. I talked about this Charlie Chaplin, The Great Dictator, which is one of my favorite movies, actually, making this parody of Hitler. And of course, then in the end, he has to go up, and it's actually the barber who stands there, and he has to make a speech. This is actually a true great man speech, I would say, because there's nothing great about him at all, because he says, I do not want to be an emperor. And there are people saying this is actually an image of the great man. We need a great man. And Chaplin's response would be completely the opposite. No, what we need is actually collective leadership, because it's in collective leadership that we take responsibility and we begin to care for other people. So we have to have these possibilities of participating. This is one of the things that I'm telling students today. Before you are an employee of an organization, you are actually a citizen of a society. Mm-hmm. And that comes before being part of an organization. What Charlie Chaplin was talking about was freedom, collective responsibility that follows from freedom. I think the fight for freedom starts with water, because these are some of the basic things that we build healthy societies on. Of course, water together with the other biosphere goals, air, life in the oceans, life on land, and things like that. I think this image, which is actually from the Stockholm Resilience Center, is very powerful also in relation to organizational management studies, because if you take the CSR pyramid, the corporate social responsibility pyramid, you will recall that that is actually completely opposite, because there you have economy as the foundation. Then you have society, and then you have ethics, and things like that. So in that sense, you have to turn the pyramid around and say, okay, there's something other that is actually foundational for that we even speak of economies and things. What can an everyday person do? Of course, as an everyday person, you have to assume your responsibility, and I think you always have some kind of possibility of assuming some kind of responsibility. But of course, you have different possibilities for that, also depending on the different systems that you're part of. But then again, it's also Hannah Arendt was doing these studies about revolutions. It's really about people coming together on the streets rather than things do not come from the top. I think that's the message here. You cannot really trust governments to do anything about, for example, the plastic pollution. So you can go in and you can become parts of NGOs, and of course, as depending on your standing on the labor market, because people have different possibilities on the labor market. I fully recognize that, but as you move along in your career, you can also become increasingly critical in terms of what kind of jobs that you take. So if you work for a shitty company, you'll be known as the one who works for a shitty company. I think that's not so funny, because at one point you also identify with your company. I work for this company, and then I work. That's not so funny. So it's more sexy also. Sorry to use that word. It's more sexy, it's more attractive to work in a good company who does good things, and motivates you, and it's more fun to go home and to tell your kids, well, I work in this country, we're doing these great things and things like that.